I remember stepping out of the car and touching the smooth fabric of my navy dress, the same one I'd worn to church for years. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean pressed and it made me feel like myself. The venue, on the other hand, looked like something out of a royal wedding. White roses climbing the pillars, golden lanterns glowing even in the daylight, and a string quartet playing softly as guests floated inside, wrapped in perfume and designer silk. I clutched my small purse, feeling suddenly out of place in a world that seemed to glitter too brightly for a woman like me. But still I smiled. Today was my son's wedding. I had raised that boy alone. Through storms and hunger and nights I cried into my pillow so he wouldn't hear. Today was supposed to be beautiful. A young wedding coordinator in a headset rushed over, glanced at her clipboard, and without even looking at me, said, "Oh, you're the groom's mother. Right this way, please." She gestured sharply, as though checking off an item on her list, and led me past rows of elegantly decorated seats, all the way toward the back. Past the rows, past the camera crew, past the golden aisle. And then she stopped. There. She pointed to a lonely chair tucked near the service area, wedged behind a tall floral structure and dangerously close to the swinging door where servers were rushing in and out with trays of champagne. I blinked confused. This can't be right. I should be up there near my son. I'm his mother. The coordinator barely paused. The couple decided this would be best for the photos. You'll still have a view. She hurried off before I could say another word. Just then my daughter-in-law glided by, draped in lace and pearls. She glanced at the chair and smiled, not warmly, but with the stiffness of someone pleased with their own cleverness. "It's better this way," she murmured. "We need the front row to look symmetrical." My heart stung. Symmetrical. As though I were a crooked piece that didn't fit into her perfect picture. I looked toward my son, my only child, hoping he would defend me, or at least acknowledge what was happening. But when our eyes met, he looked away. Quickly. Ashamedly. He fidgeted with his cufflinks, pretending not to see. People were starting to whisper. "Isn't that his mother? Why is she sitting back there? That poor woman. Maybe there's a reason?" Their words floated around me like cold wind. As I lowered myself into that hidden chair, the weight of 40 years pressed into my chest. 40 years of working double shifts. 40 years of mending clothes, packing lunches, praying over fevers. 40 years of loving a child more than my own life. 40 years raising a boy. And this was the place they gave me. The thought sliced through me like a blade. Before I go any further, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, take a moment to subscribe. Now, let me tell you what happened next. I sat down slowly, hands trembling in my lap, doing everything in my power not to let a single tear fall. For a long moment, I kept my eyes lowered, watching the shadows of servers' shoes rush past my feet. The clatter of trays and the hiss of steamed vegetables behind the service door made it hard to pretend I belonged among the elegant whispers and soft violin music drifting through the garden. Still, I forced myself to breathe. I'd learned long ago that sometimes dignity is simply the act of staying still when your heart wants to crumble. As the guests settled into their seats, I allowed myself to look around. Really look. The scene before me was breathtaking. A sprawling archway of fresh white orchids stood proudly at the altar, shimmering lightly in the afternoon sun. The aisle was lined with rose petals so perfectly arranged they looked like they'd been painted on. Every chair was wrapped in silk, tied with golden ribbon, and crowned with delicate sprigs of baby's breath. It was beautiful. It truly was. But beauty has a way of making a person like me feel even smaller. I brushed a thread from my dress, one of the few I owned that still looked respectable. I had worn it so many times I could feel its memory in my fingertips. It was the dress I wore when my son graduated high school. The dress I wore when we buried his father. The dress I wore on every holiday because we couldn't afford more. It had seen joys struggle, and more tears than I could ever admit. My son never once complained about those years. Not about the cheap meals, not about the hand-me-down winter coats, not about the nights I came home smelling like bleach from the late shift. Back then, he used to hug me as soon as I walked through the door saying, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." Where had that boy gone? I swallowed the ache rising in my throat. From my tucked-away corner, I watched guests glide in. Women wearing dresses that probably cost more than I'd made in a month. Their hair glimmered, their shoes sparkled, their laughter floated elegantly above the music. Men wore tailored suits and expensive watches, greeting each other with confident embraces. Every detail around me screamed wealth, ease, privilege. And then there was me. A faded navy dress. A thrifted clutch. Hair I'd pinned up myself while standing in the kitchen mirror. It wasn't shame I felt, no, not that. I had lived honestly. I had lived with purpose. I had raised a boy into a man using nothing but my hands, my grit, and every ounce of love I possessed. But sitting there, hidden behind a column of flowers like a forgotten decoration, I felt something colder. Loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that arrives when you are surrounded by people who are too busy shining to even notice you exist. I told myself not to cry. I told myself I had survived harder winters, harsher words, heavier losses. Widowhood had torn me open in ways this wedding never could. The day I buried my husband, I had stood tall because I had a son to raise. But today, the person I raised had chosen not to stand tall with me. My fingers tightened around the handle of my purse. The servers behind me bustled loudly, trays clinking like distant bells. The contrast was almost cruel. Luxury and noise, beauty and chaos, front row glamour and back row humiliation. I lifted my chin, refusing to let the dim corner swallow me whole. This was still my son's wedding, and whether they hid me or not, I was here. Little did I know my life, my entire story, was about to shift with the quiet scrape of a chair. Just as I adjusted myself in the chair, trying to angle my body so the servers wouldn't bump into me, the seat beside mine scraped softly across the floor. I froze. No one had been assigned to sit next to me. Everyone else had neatly printed place cards waiting at their tables. Mine had been handwritten in a hurry, tucked under the lip of the plate like an afterthought. So when that chair moved, I thought some poor guest must have wandered into the wrong seat, and would soon realize the mistake. But the man who lowered himself beside me didn't look lost. He settled in with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the bustling service staff behind us. His suit, simple but impeccably tailored, caught the afternoon light. His cologne drifted faintly toward me, familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. His hands, steady and elegant, rested on his lap as though he sat exactly where he intended to be. I stiffened, unsure what to say. Before I could gather my thoughts, he leaned slightly toward me and murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Just act like we came together." My breath caught. I opened my mouth to respond, but the man only gave me a small, reassuring nod, his eyes never leaving the scene ahead of us. His presence was soothing, unexpectedly so, and something about the timbre of his voice tugged at a memory buried deep within my chest. Around us, heads began to turn. Two women seated a few rows ahead shared a glance, whispering behind manicured nails. A gentleman leaned subtly to the side for a better look. The sudden change in the room's energy was unmistakable. In a ceremony where every seat had been carefully curated for prestige and visibility, the arrival of an elegant stranger beside the groom's mother did not go unnoticed. Then I saw my son. He stood near the altar, adjusting his tie, preparing for the music cue. He glanced up casually, until his eyes landed on me. More accurately, on the man beside me. His entire body stiffened. His face blanched so quickly I feared he might faint. His lips parted, and for a moment he looked like a boy again, caught doing something he couldn't explain. His gaze darted from me to the stranger, then to his bride, who was too absorbed in her own perfection to notice what was happening. But my son noticed. Oh, he noticed. I clutched my purse a little tighter, trying to understand what could cause such a reaction. I didn't even know who this man was. Not yet. But the air around us shifted, and I could feel it, like the hush before a storm. This wasn't a seating mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was the beginning of something I never expected to face on my son's wedding day. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to look at him directly. Something about his presence unsettled my heart in a way I hadn't felt in years, decades even. But curiosity pressed against my ribs until I finally turned my head just enough to study his profile. His jawline had softened with age, but its shape was unmistakable. His hair, once thick and dark, now carried streaks of silver that caught the light like threads of moonlight. A faint scar traced the corner of his brow, one I remembered far too well, because I was the one who had pressed a damp cloth to it when we were teenagers. My breath faltered. No, it couldn't be. I blinked, trying to shake off the impossible. But then he turned his head slowly, almost shyly, and our eyes met. Everything inside me stopped. Those eyes. Those warm, deep-set, steady eyes. 1,000 memories slammed into me all at once. Sun-drenched fields, handwritten letters, the scent of pine trees after rain. Promises whispered by two young hearts who believed life would bend kindly for them. It was him. My voice trembled as it escaped. Daniel? His lips curved into a smile that held both joy and sorrow. Hello, Lily. Hearing him say my name again after more than 40 years nearly broke me. For a moment I couldn't speak. Emotion swelled in my chest like a rising tide. Grief, wonder, disbelief, nostalgia. I felt like a young girl and an old woman all at once. How are you here? I whispered. He exhaled softly, glancing ahead as if the wedding scenery were nothing more than a curtain hiding a truth only we understood. I heard he was getting married, he said. And I knew you'd be here. I needed to see you, at least once more in this lifetime. My heart twisted painfully. I remembered everything in a rush. How we'd fallen in love too young, too deeply. How life had swept us apart when my mother got sick and I had to take on work. How his family moved away. How the letters we both wrote never found their way to each other. How I eventually married my husband. Kind, steady, safe, but always carried a quiet ache inside me. I swallowed hard. I thought you forgot me, I said quietly. Daniel shook his head. I never did. I tried to find you once years ago, but by then you were married. I didn't want to disturb your life. His words hit like a soft blow, gentle yet devastating. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. What became of him? Did he marry? Did he find joy? Was he lonely? Did he imagine that girl he once knew had turned into a woman who tucked herself behind service doors because her son no longer saw the value in her? But before I could unravel any of those threads, he spoke again, his voice a low murmur meant only for me. When I saw where they placed you, I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let them treat you as though you were invisible. My throat tightened. You don't even know what happened, I said. I don't need to, he replied. The moment I saw you sitting here hidden away, I understood everything. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I didn't want him to see me crumble. Not now. Not after 4 decades apart. Daniel reached over and gently touched my hand. A small gesture, but it felt like sunlight breaking through decades of winter. I felt myself breathe for the first time that day. Behind us, the service door swung open again. A burst of noise against the soft music. But none of it mattered. For the first time since arriving at the wedding, I felt seen. Truly seen. People around us kept whispering, glancing, speculating. My son kept stealing looks, pale and rattled. But the world had narrowed to the warmth of Daniel's hand on mine, and the quiet storm of memories rising between us. After 40 years apart, he was here, beside me, at my son's wedding. As if fate had finally delivered a letter that got lost in time. Daniel didn't move his hand from mine, and I didn't pull away. Something in that quiet connection steadied me. Like a hand on my back after years of standing alone. But the effect it had on the people around us, that was something I wasn't prepared for. Whispers spread through the guests like ripples across still water. Who is he? He came with her? He looks important. That's the groom's mother, isn't it? Heads began to turn. Not to mock. Not to pity. To wonder. The women in their jeweled dresses stole glances over their shoulders. Men paused mid-conversation, assessing Daniel with the cautious curiosity they usually reserved for someone of influence. Even the servers slowed when stepping out of the swinging kitchen door. Their eyes lingering just a moment too long. For the first time that afternoon, I wasn't invisible. I sat a little straighter, my back no longer rounding under the weight of humiliation. A strange warmth spread through my chest, part disbelief, part relief, part something I hadn't felt in years. Daniel remained calm, composed, and quietly commanding. He didn't puff himself up or boast. He simply existed in a way that drew respect. Age had refined him into someone who didn't need to demand a presence. He simply had one. Then I noticed my daughter-in-law. She had finally caught sight of us. She whispered fiercely to her maid of honor, who turned to look at me with wide eyes. Her expression, once smug and self-assured, tightened. Jaw clenched, shoulders stiffening beneath the delicate lace of her gown. Her gaze flicked between Daniel and me as if trying to solve a puzzle she didn't like the shape of. Next was my son. He kept glancing over, pretending to check on the guests, but it was obvious he was rattled. His hands twitched against his sides. He tugged at his cufflinks, cleared his throat, shifted his weight, signs I knew too well. He was anxious. He was unsure. He was afraid almost of what this meant. And all the while, Daniel sat with an ease that made it clear he wasn't going to be moved. Not by awkward stares. Not by judgment. Not by the fact that he was disrupting whatever careful image the bride had attempted to curate. At one point, a distant relative from the bride's side walked by, giving me a half-hearted smile, the kind given to someone beneath them. But when her eyes landed on Daniel, she paused. Her smile sharpened, turned polite, even respectful. "Good afternoon," she said to him, as though he were someone she needed to impress. Daniel nodded graciously. Her gaze darted to me again, this time uncertain, almost apologetic, before she hurried away. My heart thudded quietly. The shift was subtle, but it was happening. The woman who had been tucked behind trays and flower stands was suddenly worth noticing, all because of the man beside her. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Hold your head up, Lily." I inhaled slowly. For years I had forgotten what it felt like to be someone worth looking at, worth speaking to, worth respect. But at that moment, under the soft light of my son's extravagant wedding, surrounded by people who hadn't given me a second glance, Daniel's presence lifted me out of that lonely corner and placed me back into the world. I wasn't hidden anymore. When the ceremony ended, guests rose from their seats in a synchronized rustle of silk and murmurs. People drifted toward the reception area, where champagne waited on tall silver trays. Daniel remained beside me, letting the flow of guests thin before he stood. "Walk with me?" he asked softly. It wasn't a question I expected to hear. Not after 40 years of silence, not after the shock of seeing him in this place of all places. But something inside me leaned toward him, the way a tired plant leans toward sunlight. I nodded. He offered his arm, and for a heartbeat I hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had extended a hand to me. Not for help, not for pity, but simply because they wished to. My fingers trembled as I placed them lightly on his arm. We slipped quietly toward the garden, away from the crowds, the cameras, and the persistent eyes of those who suddenly seemed overly interested in the groom's mother. The garden, decorated for photographs, smelled of roses and eucalyptus. The air was soft, and the pathways glowed beneath lanterns shaped like tiny stars. We walked slowly, matching each other's pace as though we had never stopped walking side by side. For a moment neither of us spoke. Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but full of years, full of things unsaid. Finally, Daniel stopped beside a small fountain, its water gently bubbling over smooth stones. He turned to me, his expression tender yet weighted with the kind of sadness only time can carve into a person. "You look just like I remembered," he said quietly. I laughed softly, shaking my head. 40 years changes a person. "Maybe," he replied. "But not you. Not in the ways that mattered." His words warmed something inside me I didn't realize had grown cold. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, worn from work, from mothering, from life. "I thought you disappeared," I murmured. "I thought you walked away." His jaw tightened, regret flickering across his features. "I didn't walk away, Lily. I left because I had to. My father got a job out of state. And when I wrote to you," he paused. "When you never wrote back, I thought you'd moved on." "I did write," I whispered, the old ache swelling in my chest. "I wrote so many times. I waited for your letters every afternoon for months." Daniel exhaled, the sound trembling slightly. "My mother disapproved of you." I didn't know it then, but she intercepted my mail. I found the box of letters years later, unopened. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. All those months I had spent waiting by the window. All those afternoons in the tiny apartment, praying for a letter. All those nights I cried quietly, believing he had forgotten me. None of it had been real. None of it had been his choice. I pressed a shaking hand to my chest. Daniel. He reached for my other hand gently, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I'm sorry, he said, for everything you lived through alone. For the things we both lost because someone decided they knew better than two young people in love. Tears burned behind my eyes. I married a good man, I said softly. I built a life with him. But there were days when a part of me wondered what became of you. Daniel nodded slowly. And I wondered about you. Even after I saw you were married, I kept your memory tucked away. Not out of longing, out of respect. A warm silence settled around us. We sat on a stone bench near the fountain, the world quiet except for the gentle splash of water and the distant hum of wedding music drifting from the reception tent. Daniel looked at me with eyes that held 40 years of roads, choices, regrets, and resilience. I came today because I didn't want to leave this world without seeing you again. Without making sure you knew the truth. My breath shook. You should have been in the front row, Lily, he said softly. You deserved honor today. And I wasn't going to let them hide you. My heart tightened at his words, not from pain this time, but from something I hadn't felt in a long time. Comfort. Recognition. Being valued. I looked at him, this man who had once held my youth and now held my silence with equal care. Thank you, I whispered. The wind carried the scent of roses between us. And somewhere inside me, something long-wounded began to mend. Daniel and I were still seated on the stone bench near the fountain when I heard hurried footsteps approaching. Heels clicking sharply, too fast, too agitated for a bride who should have been basking in her moment. My daughter-in-law appeared first. Her gown shimmered under the lanterns, but her expression was anything but elegant. Her lips were tight, her chest rising and falling with anger she was trying, and failing, to disguise. Behind her, trailing like a guilt-ridden shadow, was my son. His face was pale. He kept looking from me to Daniel, as though trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't have the courage to ask about. There you are, my daughter-in-law said, forcing a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. We've been looking everywhere for you. Her gaze flicked to Daniel. A quick, assessing look that turned cautious when she realized he wasn't just some random guest. Then she looked at his hand resting near mine, and her expression shifted entirely. And who exactly, she asked, voice coated in sugar and venom, is this? Daniel didn't flinch. He sat straighter, his calm presence only sharpening the contrast between her anxiety and his quiet confidence. I could have explained. I could have softened it for her. But something inside me, the part that had been humiliated, hidden, stepped over, rose up before I could shrink back. He's someone important to me, I said evenly. Her eyebrows shot up. Important? Since when? Since before you were even born, I replied. The words hung in the air like a small, controlled explosion. My son inhaled sharply. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I looked at him, really looked at him. His shoulders hunched slightly, like he expected a scolding or maybe a truth he wasn't ready to hear. My heart softened, but only a little. Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law stepped closer, lowering her voice. You could have told us if you were bringing someone. I mean, it looks strange. Guests are talking. People think. Daniel cut in quietly. People think what? His tone wasn't sharp, but it carried enough weight to make her stumble over her next words. I just mean this is our wedding. The seating, the photos, everything was planned carefully. And suddenly you're here with him making a scene. A scene? I repeated, the word stinging. A scene is when the groom's mother is placed behind the catering staff. A scene is when she's hidden so she won't ruin the bride's pictures. My daughter-in-law's mouth opened and closed, searching for a defense. My son took a step forward, shame reddening his cheeks. Mom, listen, we didn't mean to hurt you. We thought. Daniel stood then slowly, gracefully. He wasn't tall in a domineering way, but his presence filled the space between us like a shield. You thought she wouldn't mind, he said. You thought she'd sit quietly where you placed her, even if it stripped her of dignity. His voice never rose, yet every word hit with the precision of a chisel-splitting stone. My son looked stricken. I didn't think it through, he whispered. No, I said gently. You didn't. My daughter-in-law straightened her shoulders, desperately trying to salvage control. Well, regardless, she needs to be in the family photos. There's no time for whatever this is. She gestured vaguely toward Daniel, as though trying to wave him out of existence. I felt something hot and firm rise in me. No, I said softly. Both of them froze. My son blinked. No, I'll join the photos, I said. But I won't be spoken to like a prop. Not by either of you. Not ever again. My daughter-in-law inhaled sharply, offended. My son looked crushed. Daniel placed a steadying hand on my back, not claiming me, not displaying me, just supporting. The balance had shifted, and they felt it. For the first time, I wasn't the quiet, apologetic mother they could push into corners. I had stepped out of the shadows. And I wasn't going back. The walk back toward the reception area felt different than before. Not because the scenery had changed, but because I had. Daniel walked beside me with quiet certainty, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't shrinking to fit into someone else's expectations. As we approached the tent, conversations paused. People turned their heads slightly, subtle, polite, but unmistakably curious. The groom's mother returning on the arm of a distinguished stranger. That was something worth noticing. My daughter-in-law's family stood near the entrance, clustered in a circle of polished smiles and thinly veiled superiority. Her mother, dressed in an ornate champagne gown, was the first to spot us. Her eyes widened slightly, taking in Daniel's presence before they shifted to me with a new, calculated expression. She stepped forward. Oh, we didn't realize you had company. Her tone was polite, but it wavered around the edges. She was used to dominance. Used to being the highest social tier in any room. Daniel's presence unsettled her, and she didn't know how to hide it. Daniel gave her a gentle nod. A pleasure. For a brief moment, she smiled as though greeting an equal, until her eyes flicked to a couple whispering nearby. Their words drifted just close enough. He's the one from that firm, isn't he? The one who? Yes. Very influential. Major donor. Wealthy. People say he keeps to himself, but when he speaks, well, people listen. My daughter-in-law's mother straightened instantly, her posture sharp and attentive. Oh, she breathed, her voice softening. Are you that Daniel? Daniel didn't answer directly. He didn't have to. His silence carried its own gravity. Suddenly, the elaborate gown and proud posture of my daughter-in-law's mother didn't seem so towering. She folded her hands nervously, a small tremor betraying her confidence. You two know each other? She asked. Yes, Daniel replied simply. We've known each other most of our lives. The statement hit harder than any threat or insult could have. It rewired the social wiring of the room in an instant. My daughter-in-law's father checked his watch, cleared his throat, and muttered something about refilling drinks before stepping away. Two bridesmaids exchanged startled glances, whispering behind their bouquets. Guests adjusted their attitudes with sudden, almost comical speed. Daniel remained calm, not enjoying the attention nor diminishing it. He simply stood there, a living contradiction to the idea that I was someone people could dismiss. My daughter-in-law emerged from the crowd, her smile stretched tight as she approached. Ready for family photos? She asked, voice overly sweet. Daniel turned to me, his expression patient, allowing me to decide how the moment should unfold. I inhaled slowly. Yes, I said. But things are going to change. Her smile slipped. Change? You will treat me with basic respect, I said. Not a threat. Not a plea. Just the truth set down like a stone. I won't be hidden again. I won't be spoken to like an inconvenience. My daughter-in-law's mother opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke before she could. Lily deserves dignity, he said. And I believe your family would want to honor that. The subtle emphasis on your family made the message clear. Their actions reflected on them, and against someone of Daniel's quiet influence, that reflection mattered. My daughter-in-law swallowed hard, the color rising in her cheeks. Yes, of course, she murmured. We didn't mean any disrespect, but I knew better. Intent didn't erase impact. Daniel offered his arm again. Shall we, Lily? I placed my hand on his arm, not out of dependence but out of choice. As we moved toward the photographers, the whispers around us shifted. Not mocking, not pitying, but admiring. For the first time that day, I wasn't being looked past. I was being looked at. Not because of Daniel's status, though it certainly unsettled those who had dismissed me, but because I stood tall and refused to remain in the shadows. The balance had changed and everyone in that room felt it. The noise of the reception faded the moment Daniel and I stepped outside onto the terrace. Soft evening light washed over the garden, tinting the roses a pale gold. After the intensity of the confrontation and the shifting crowd, the quiet felt like a balm on my skin. Daniel guided me toward a small table tucked beneath an archway of jasmine vines. A server approached with 2 glasses, asking if he could bring anything. Daniel politely requested tea for both of us, then let the silence settle naturally as we took our seats. For a few moments, we simply sat there listening to the gentle clatter of dishes from the banquet hall and the faint laughter drifting from inside. People existed somewhere in that distant bubble, but here under the jasmine arch, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the 2 of us. Are you all right? Daniel asked softly. I nodded. More than I expected to be. He gave a knowing smile. You handled yourself with grace. I looked down at my hands folded in my lap. I haven't raised my voice or demanded anything for years. After my husband passed, it was easier to stay quiet than risk upsetting anyone. Quiet isn't the same as peaceful, he said gently. Sometimes silence is just a wound that's forgotten how to close. The truth of that settled over me like a whisper. The server returned with our tea, steam curling from the cups. I wrapped my hands around the warm porcelain, grateful for something steady to hold. Seeing you today, I said softly, was like finding a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. Daniel's eyes softened. Life has a strange way of circling back. I never expected fate to bring me to your son's wedding, but when I saw you sitting there, hidden behind all those decorations, he shook his head. I couldn't stay away. I swallowed, emotion gathering in my throat. I thought I had made peace with the past, but sitting with you now, it's like the years fell away. He chuckled quietly. Except for the gray hair. And the backaches, I added. We both laughed, an easy, familiar sound that felt impossibly natural. It surprised me how quickly the old comfort returned, as though life had paused our connection instead of breaking it. Do you ever think about what might have been? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't rush his response. He set his cup down, folded his hands, and looked at me with an honesty that warmed and stung all at once. I do, he said. But not with regret. We were young. Circumstances shaped us. You built a life, raised a son, loved a good man. You should be proud of the woman you became. Tears prickled behind my eyes, but I blinked them away. And you? Did you find someone? Daniel hesitated. I kept mostly to myself. Work. Travel. A few friendships, but nothing that felt like home. The ache in his voice mirrored something in my own chest. We sat in silence again, sipping our tea as the lanterns above flickered softly in the growing dusk. There was no need for dramatic declarations or rushed decisions. Just presence. Just warmth. Just 2 people who had wandered far, and somehow crossed paths once more. When he finally reached across the table and gently touched my hand, the gesture felt like a promise. Not of romance, not of obligation, but of companionship. Of possibility. In that quiet moment, surrounded by jasmine and fading daylight, a piece of my heart that had been dormant for years stirred awake. The reception carried on inside, but I didn't feel any urgency to return. From the terrace, I could see guests dancing beneath the chandeliers, their laughter rising above the music. The celebration moved on as if nothing had shifted, but for my son, everything had. I heard the door open behind us. Soft footsteps approached, hesitant and unsure. When I turned, my son stood there, holding his phone in one hand as though he needed it for balance. Mom, he said quietly. Can we talk? Daniel gave me a gentle nod and stepped a respectful distance away, allowing us privacy without leaving entirely. My son sat across from me, his shoulders slumped, eyes tired. Not from the wedding. No, this was something deeper. Something he had avoided for far too long. I shouldn't have let them put you back there, he began. His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't rush to comfort him. Instead, I folded my hands and waited. He swallowed hard. I didn't want to start a fight on the wedding day. She said the photographer needed symmetry, and her mother said you'd prefer a quieter seat, and he stopped himself. I didn't think. Not really. I just let it happen. My heart tightened, but I kept my voice steady. You let it happen because you were afraid of upsetting them. He looked down at his hands. Yeah, I guess I did. Silence settled between us. Not cold, not sharp, but heavy with truth. When you were a boy, I said softly, you used to stand in front of me every time someone tried to push me aside. You used to say you'd always take care of me. I paused. I don't need protection now, but I do need respect. He winced as though the words stung. You're right. I let you down. He rubbed his forehead, exhaling shakily. Seeing that man sit next to you, I didn't know who he was. I just saw the way people looked at him, and suddenly I realized how badly I'd treated you. It was like being punched in the stomach. For the first time that day, I reached across the table and took his hand. I don't care about his status, I said gently. I care that it took another person's presence for you to notice my absence. His eyes filled with tears, and he nodded, unable to speak. Inside, the music changed to something lively. Guests cheered. The world went on. He cleared his throat. Mommed about her. About my wife. He hesitated. She shouldn't have spoken to you like that. She shouldn't have made you feel small. I know you deserve better. Then make sure she knows that too, I said. Not for me, so your future children know how to treat their family. He absorbed this slowly, nodding again. And Daniel? He asked quietly. Who is he to you? A soft smile touched my lips. Someone I once cared for. Someone who cared for me. A part of my story you never knew. He shifted, processing that. Are you two together? No, I said. But he reminded me that I'm allowed to take up space. Something I forgot over the years. My son wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I'll talk to her. And to her parents. I won't let them disrespect you again. His voice was firmer now, closer to the boy I once knew. Before leaving, he squeezed my hand like he did when he was little, when the world scared him. That squeeze held apology, remorse, and a promise to do better. He rose and walked back inside to face the consequences of his choices. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone or overlooked. I felt steady. Daniel returned to my side and sat beside me once more. How did it go? He asked. I sighed, not with exhaustion but release. It went how it needed to go. We watched the golden lights flicker through the tent, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, knowing something fundamental had shifted. Not just in my son but in me. When Daniel and I eventually stepped back inside the reception tent, the atmosphere seemed lighter, not joyful but recalibrated, as though everyone sensed a shift but couldn't quite name it. My son stood near the stage, speaking with the photographer. His posture was straighter, more grounded. When he saw me, he excused himself and approached with measured steps. Mom, he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. They're gathering everyone for the family photos. You're in the front row with us. His words were tentative but sincere. I nodded. All right. The photographer began arranging everyone, calling out instructions with brisk efficiency. Bridesmaids clustered on one side, groomsmen on the other. My daughter-in-law's parents, usually quick to position themselves front and center, hesitated this time, offering Daniel a fleeting, nervous glance before stepping back. Then came my turn. Mother of the groom, the photographer called, gesturing me forward. But before I took a step, my daughter-in-law approached. Her smile was stiff, but there was something else beneath it, something uneasy. Mrs. Hale, she began, smoothing the skirt of her gown as she searched for the right words. I wanted to say I'm sorry For earlier. It wasn't right. Her voice wavered slightly. Not a performance but genuine uncertainty. For a moment I simply looked at her. This young woman so desperate for a picture-perfect life that she didn't realize who she'd stepped on to create it. I accept your apology, I said gently. But I won't accept being treated like a burden again. She nodded quickly. Of course. It won't happen. My son placed a hand on her back, guiding her to stand beside him. A small gesture but a meaningful one. He wasn't hiding behind her anymore. He was choosing to stand with her while also standing up for me. The photographer lifted his camera. All right, everyone, smile. I stepped forward but Daniel remained behind. I glanced back at him, silently checking if he was comfortable. He gave me a warm, steady nod. This is your place, he said. Go stand in it. So I did. For the first time that day, I stood where I belonged, beside my son, part of the family, not tucked away like an afterthought. The flash went off, capturing a moment I never thought I'd have. After the photos, a few guests approached me, some with genuine warmth, others with thinly veiled curiosity. It's lovely to finally meet you. You raised a wonderful man. We're so glad you're up here with the family. Their tone had shifted, but I accepted each comment with polite grace. I didn't need their approval, but I welcomed their acknowledgement. As the music resumed and people drifted back to the dance floor, Daniel came to stand beside me again. You handled yourself beautifully, he said softly. I just told the truth, I replied. He smiled. Sometimes the truth is the bravest thing of all. We stood together, watching the celebration continue. Not as outsiders, not as decorations, but as people with a place, a voice, and a quiet dignity that finally commanded the room. By the time the reception drew to a close, the night had settled into a quiet hum. Music fading, lanterns dimming, guests drifting out with their heels in hand and jackets draped over shoulders. The chaos of the day no longer pressed on me. Instead, a gentle stillness wrapped itself around my heart. I stepped outside onto the now empty garden pathway, the roses leaning softly in the cool night breeze. My son soon joined me, lingering awkwardly at my side. Mom, he said quietly, thank you for staying. I looked at him, seeing not the grown man in a suit but the little boy who once clung to my apron when thunderstorms scared him. You're my son, I said simply. Even when you falter, you're still my son. He nodded, his eyes glistening in the warm glow of the garden lights. I'll do better, he whispered. I know you will. He hugged me tight, genuine and full of remorse. When he pulled back, he kissed my cheek and returned to his wife, offering her his arm. For the first time that day, their unity didn't make me ache. It made me hopeful. When they walked away, I turned to find Daniel waiting near the gate, hands in his pockets, watching me with a soft, quiet patience. It struck me that he had done that all day, waited, supported, walked beside me without taking over. I joined him and we strolled down the garden path together. The night air smelled faintly of jasmine, the same scent that had surrounded us years ago in a place long gone. At the end of the path, I paused beside a small wooden chair placed beneath a willow tree, one of the overlooked decorations from the ceremony. A single rose had fallen onto the seat. I picked it up, holding it gently. This day started with me being hidden, I murmured. And it's ending with me being seen. Daniel smiled. You were always worth seeing, Lily. Some people just needed a reminder. His words wrapped around me with a warmth I hadn't felt in decades. As I tucked the fallen rose into my purse, I felt something shift, quietly but profoundly. Not a return to youth. Not a resurgence of the past. Something simpler, deeper. Renewal. I turned to him. Walk me to my car? With pleasure, he said, offering his arm. We stepped forward together, two older souls carrying years of separate stories, finally walking the same path again. And before I close this chapter, let me say one last thing. If you enjoy stories like mine, stories of strength, love and second chances, please subscribe. Means more than you know.